Welcome to this episode of Redline TV. I'm Terry Conway from Islington North CLP, and with me is Mike Cowley, who you've seen many times before on Redlines. And we're here to talk to recovering politician and erstwhile economist Alan Simpson. We're meeting more or less halfway through COP28, which means that the environmental catastrophe has been more in the public eye in terms of the media over the last week than it often is, despite the fact that it's probably the greatest catastrophe facing socialists and eco-socialists. We don't get much space to talk about it. Tomorrow there will be demonstrations across Britain and other parts of the world marking the halfway point of the COP. So we thought this was an appropriate time to talk to Alan about what he made of what's going on and how we should be campaigning for different policies. So, your thoughts, Alan?
Well, my first thought is that we have to expect very little to come out of COP28. And already that is what we're getting. The announcements about the loss and damage fund, which they kicked off with, is good news in principle, but pitiful in what it's offering. That 450 million or so is just 1/1000th of the amount that a loss and damage fund really needs. And that seemed to me to be a good measure of where our expectations need to be pitched. And the other one was to say, once you recognize that there are almost just short of 2,500 accredited lobbyists from the fossil fuel industry that are there anyway. They're not there to organize solar street parties. They're there to block any meaningful progress to decarbonize the whole framework of global economics. So, it's like asking the Cali cartel to dismantle the drugs trade. It isn't going to happen. Having said that, if we take a step back from it, what it seems to me abundantly clear is that not only is this the biggest existential challenge that humanity has ever faced, that the implosions are now going to take place, whatever the political leaders say. Yes, there is a dearth of global real leadership, but those leaders aren't in control anyway, and so we've got to then have the courage to look at the collapse and implosions that will take place and work out how we respond to those and how we build a framework of what can still survive but has to live very, very differently from the way in which we have been planning and thinking and debating things thus far. So it's a big intellectual step, and I think that only the left is able to take, if we can get out of our own sectarian squabbles and engage with the real nature, the transformative nature of those environmental challenges that we're going to have to respond to, then we can genuinely still build a different survivable future. But it's not going to come out of current economics and politics, and it's certainly not going to come out in the next Labour manifesto. People have said to me, is Starmer aiming to be the new or next Blair? Well, I don't know whether he is or not, but if that is the case, he will be Blair without the charisma and without the good fortune of a set of economic conditions that really worked in favour of the new Labour administration, even if they went on to squander most of those real opportunities. So that the next Labour government will come in to a situation that is going to implode at the most astonishing rate. And it will be the shortest of all political honeymoons before all of those challenges pile back in. And the conventional notions of how we get out of this, the ones that are being uttered by Rachel Reeves and Co at the moment, which is, well, we just have to hold fire on the £28 billion commitments to green the economy. And we have to grow the economy first. Well, this is nonsense. And I think the left are the ones who have to step back and say, hang on a minute, let's look at the growth illusion, because that illusion died. That reality died when Thatcher came in 79. And if you look at the graphs that there are about wage growth and productivity growth, the age of prosperity from 1945 to 1979 saw people's pay increase in line with productivity, that people genuinely got a decent share of the productivity improvements that took place. Post 79, when capitalism shifted from being production capitalism or land-based capitalism to finance capitalism, every step of productivity growth has been siphoned off by the financial sector. All the wealth that has now been accumulated during the pandemic and post-pandemic, the richest 1% hoovered up wealth and well-being. And every aspect of productivity growth has simply resulted in higher returns going to finance and lower job prospects coming to the rest of the economy. So there's a divergence that is taking place around the productivity agenda that used to be relevant, but now isn't. So we've got to refocus on where and how we raise finance, at what level, both locally and nationally and internationally. What are the new institutions that are needed at a global level in almost the equivalent of a new post-1945 scenario? And how do we embed that in a new set of economics that shapes our own localities and our ability to restore democracy as much as we restore the viability of a planet that we can live in harmony with? It'll take the left a couple of weekends to get there, but we're the only ones who I think can do that journey.
And I guess, Alan, we start tomorrow. It's first weekend tomorrow. Viewers will know that we're speaking on the Friday before the big demonstrations tomorrow. And I just, Alan, wanted to pick you up on the politics of this, because as you say, or as you allude to, even the very best politicians need a mass movement at their side to leverage the political space within which they can operate. And I've been really heartened, really encouraged, and goodness knows we need opportunities for hope these days, by a couple of things. I was reading a fantastic book, I'm sure you've both come across, Angela Davis, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, where she is at pains throughout the essays and speeches to link campaigns which seem kind of disparate and disconnected, from Palestine to the industrial prison complex to the environment, to feminism. And I read in maybe an unexpected place, Greta Thunberg the other day in the newspaper, really boldly standing up for her right to express solidarity with the Palestinian people. And I'm sure you've seen it, Terry and Alan, on the demonstrations for Palestine, certainly in Edinburgh that I've been in. there have been climate protesters there, and people very consciously trying to make links and intersections, as Angela Davis calls them, between campaigns. And I just wonder, Alan, whether you see that as a sign of the kind of replenishing and re-energising of the left that we desperately need after 2015 and the years up to now. Because I'm seeing in these demonstrations just a real energy and a real desire, a real appetite still to engage with issues of social justice.
I don't think we can get anywhere without a reconnection with the social justice agenda. But again, the challenge for the left, I think there are two challenges. The first is we have, in the past, if there's a criticism that I have, it's that we have often ended up being oppositionalist. You know, that we can be clear and vociferous about all the things that we oppose, but it's a very negative position. And we don't have the luxury of that anymore. We've got to become propositionalists, unashamedly propositionalists in everything that remains of our lives. The second is that we have to do that in a way that emphasizes the inclusive rather than the exclusive. And some of that means dropping the casual caricatures that we can sometimes find ourselves saddled with. So, you know, in relation to this, the horrendous things that are happening in Gaza and the West Bank, which for me are really about ethnic cleansing. And, you know, the fact that we're not able even to say that seems monstrous. But this is not an anti-Israeli or anti-Jewish position, because those Jewish voices inside Israel that are trying to say the same things are facing the most brutal hostility from the IDF and the Netanyahu government. So the peace and inclusivity that we're campaigning for needs to be one that, you know, in the context of Israel and the Palestinians, it has to be an inclusive one. Because I know the left are getting lambasted for the from the river to the sea phrase, but equally, I've seen settler protests in Israel using exactly the same phrase and saying, but it follows from the river to the sea, Israel will be free. And nowhere is there a space that talks about living on equal terms, either in a one-state or two-state solution, but where there are equal rights and respect for both communities and traditions. Now, that is the space that the left has to be working on, the building of social cohesion and solidarities that celebrate the differences between us, but which are able to take the Angela Davis line and work in solidarity with each other. That it isn't people that are the problem, it's the exploitation of people by a narrow elite that are coming to, I suppose, drive global politics into a form of totalitarianism that takes us back into feudalism. This is the era that I think we're already paddling in, has become one of corporate feudalism. You know, the big money now buys big prejudices and in which politics chases small diversions. And, you know, the UK's obsession, or the Tory government's obsession with the small boats issue, it is the example par excellence of where that takes you. This is, you know, the pursuit of a big central political issue around 200 people. You know, when you're talking about 600,000 plus refugees, and when they say we've got to tackle the source of the problem, it's you know, what they're talking about it in terms of where the boats are coming from and who's organizing them, not who's driving the insecurity that forces people to flee. And I always say to people, anyone coming to the UK isn't coming for the weather. I mean, they're coming because their lives, the lives of their children, their extended families, are not livable anymore because we fund weapons and war and rather than well-being. So that's the shift that the left has to be arguing for. And it's a new international peace movement. And, in some ways, CND took us down that route before, and E.P. Thompson's European peace movement extended the same thinking to the notion that it isn't people that are each other's enemies. It's armies and the militarization of division and the accumulation of wealth by the few and the exploitation of the many that is the problem. So, we have to invert that. And even if it's a line of argument that people find it harder to even find space for inside the Labour Party in discussions and constituency party meetings or whatever, or even to be allowed to remain in the Labour Party, those discussions have to take place because they will provide the basis of the only viable path out of the mess that we're in.
And I think, your points about migration, I think take us back to the question of environmental disaster, because increasingly numbers of millions of people are being forced to leave where they and their families have traditionally lived because of environmental disaster, because of salination, because of desertification, as well as because of war and economic misery that you spoke about. So I think, we come full circle to where we started. And I think that is becoming more visible, although I think not enough understood by some of those campaigners around migration. The way that climate chaos is driving huge movements of people.
Absolutely. But we will find a mixture of solutions that are a combination of the historically wise and the current technologically smart. And so, what I was just reading through recently was about how people in different parts of the world are dealing with those current turbulent weather upheavals. And you go from the fact that in Bangladesh, that is used to there being floods, the farmers have started to develop floating plant beds so that they will do their plants within these long box corridors, which, when the floods take place, the whole sort of corridor of box plants just rises up and floats, but it isn't washed away, and nor is the soil and the subsurface that they're drawing from. And I thought, gosh, that's really, really smart. We know that upstream plantings of crops are absolutely essential to slow the flow of torrential downpours, and that those processes will be as relevant in the West as they are in the South and around the Southern Hemisphere, Southeast Asia. We know too that one of the great things, if we allow it, is that renewable energy systems are much more able to be developed in terms of localized and regionalized economics than the current proposals for saying, okay, let's put a huge solar array in the middle of the Sahara and then get a cable from the Sahara to Britain. Actually, if you can do stuff in the Sahara, keep the benefits in the Sahara. We've got to look to be developing and deploying the benefits in the localities where they're placed. The idea of long distance transshipment of goods and services, I think, is going to have to give way to the relocalization, the decentralization of systems, if only because the internet has already made us distrustful of false news that is used to divide us, because we no longer know with any certainty how things are being produced. But all of those localized economic systems are themselves much more inherently accountable, and we need to reclaim and rediscover that. I say this because I have a lovely example. When I was an MP, there was this guy I had a constituent who was, for more than half of the 18 years I was an MP, he and I had a robust relationship on issues. Sometimes I'd agree, sometimes I wouldn't, but he was always clear where I was coming from. I came out of an advice surgery one Saturday, and he was just walking down the road, and I said to him, "Oh, Mr. Ellis, I've just finished the surgery. You're not coming to see me, are you?" He said, No, I'm just doing my shopping. And I said, "Oh, well, you'll be dead excited because we've got an election coming up soon, and you'll have another chance not to vote Labour." And he said, "Oh, don't you be so cocky, Mr. Simpson. You don't know who I vote for." I said, "No, I don't, and I've never asked you, and I never will. But I'll just do whatever issues you throw up. But I don't expect you to vote for me." And he said, No, you don't understand, do you? He says, you're a bastard, but you're my bastard, and I know where to find you." And that stayed with me, because for all the shortcomings that we have in local governance, actually people know where to find the people who are responsible and that they can hold accountable. And I think there is real merit in looking at all of those lines of renewed accountability that come out of localized food systems, localized energy systems, and localized production and accountability systems, and local, the carbon reduction in localized transport sort of enclaves, such that everything then plays into the climate change agenda, in which in our case, we've got a legal duty in the UK to cut our carbon emissions by 68% by 2030. That is written in law as a commitment under the Climate Change Act. Now, you ask how this is going to be done. The answer is, it means every part of the economy is effectively going to have to cut carbon emissions by 10% per year, every year, until at least 2030, probably for the decade after. And the conversations that we've got to start having with local authorities, with water authorities, with universities, with the farming communities is, how will we be setting out to deliver that 10% cut in carbon emissions year on year on year on year? And we can do it, but we have to change the nature of what we produce and how we produce it and how we distribute it and how we store it. And all of this, the smart renewable technologies will make this possible, but they don't have to begin by replicating the notion that the only solutions are national infrastructures that involve the creation of new energy motorways or food motorways that ship goods from one end of the country to the other end of the country, because that's what suits the interests of large-scale distributors or energy suppliers. We've got to break that model, and we have to do it by reclaiming the notion of a renewed and accountable set of localized democracies.
You mentioned, Alan, of finding politicians and knowing where they are. I just thought of Keir Starmer arriving in Glasgow last night, and unfortunately for Keir, a large amount of Glaswegians found him and chased him to his hotel. We're approaching the end of the show, Alan, and I wanted to pick you up on the Labour Party and its commitments so far, which we know are fragile and have been retreated on once or twice already in the area. One of the things that we've been talking about on the Scottish Labour Party left once the Labour government has returned to office is exactly as you were describing, Alan, that to be propositionalist rather than immediately to go into opposition as soon as the government emerges, and to be seen as negative and to be easily framed in that way. And one of the kind of tactics that we kind of tentatively agreed on was to identify those parts of the manifesto and those parts of the legislative programme that we think show some promise, and to try and leverage a consolidation of those, and in doing so, a deepening and broadening of those, to create momentum behind the small good things that they are doing, to, as you say, to try and be positive. What areas, Alan, in Rachel Reeves' commitments, which there was a BBC report last week that she'd retreated on again, but I think her office denied that. What areas, though, do you see that can potentially, with the right political pressure, the right organisation from the left, could we cement, but also push much, much further than perhaps currently they're willing to go?
Okay, Mike, I tell you what makes me really excited about this in respect of your own position, which is that I think Scotland is phenomenally well placed to lead this process, because the danger for me is that Labour will try and tuck in behind a number of conservative fallacies. Now, this is going to be awkward for us on the left, because it will mean having really difficult conversations with parts of the trade union movements that are also locked into the fallacies. And against this 10% annual cut in carbon emissions, the obligatory 10% annual cut, nuclear is a complete irrelevance. It cannot deliver on time, and it cannot deliver on a comparative cost basis that even begins to occupy the same space as renewables. Now, Scotland has some phenomenal resources in terms of renewables, some of which are already really well developed. Others are waiting to develop. But the way we do that really has to be on the basis of decentralized systems. And let me just give you the one practical example on this. If you look at the current energy system, we lose 50% of energy generated at the power station. In the context of nuclear, it's 70%. Now, if you're talking about cutting those losses, the most immediate way in which you can do so is you connect stuff to the local, and you have it generated and stored. Energy, the physics of energy means that electricity will go to the nearest point of use. Stuff that we generate from my roof doesn't come out the roof and think, oh, where are we going today? Let's nip down to Brighton. We'll have a play on the beach. Let's get up to Scotland and, go on a bit of a walk around the mountains. It doesn't do that. It just goes to the nearest point of use. And what that plays to is a return to the notion that we had from 1816 through into the 1880s. And that is the emergence of municipal energy companies, gas, water, and electricity, that were collectively, municipally provided, just using the wrong fuel, the only fuels that were available. But now we can do it with clean energy. And now we can store that as well. The substations on every estate can easily be kitted out with battery storage so that people can share that energy. But the current rules are that, I could give surpluses from my roof to up to 2 of my neighbours. If I do more. I'm a criminal, because you can only do that if you've got a full supply license, and you've got to have 3 million quid to get a license. So the rules are rigged in favor of the energy cartel. So we've got to break those rules. We break the cartel in order to empower the democratic and the local and the accountable. And that's the starting point. Scotland really could give a lead on that. And so probably could Wales. I love the fact that one conference I did in Wales, there was a guy, we were talking about renewables and whether Wales could be self-sufficient. And he said, that would be brilliant. He said, it would mean we could deliver the Martin Luther King programme. And I was completely gobsmacked by this. I said, well, I didn't realise Martin Luther King ever said anything about Wales. What was it? He said, no, he didn't. But he almost did. It was the I have a stream. And we've got bloody thousands of streams. And we could have generators on every bloody stream, powering every village. We can have village-based minibuses. There are EVs. They could all come from the streams. And I thought, this is brilliant. And in a sense, that's where the technology of today, with the democracy of yesterday, can redefine the politics of tomorrow. And that's where we've got to be.
Thanks, Alan. I know Terry will want to just round things off, but just very quickly, what's frustrating up here, Alan, is the SNP government have had many years to use the devolved tools that they've got to do some of the things that you're talking about, and there has been some small measure of that, but much of it has been outsourced to third parties and has not come under national government, never mind local government control. So yeah, fantastic resources up here. I can promise you today the resources are out very much in the Edinburgh weather, and it's so frustrating that this natural resource is just waiting to be galvanised in the interests of what you're describing.
Yeah, and it just saddens me, Terry. I mean, when I was acting as the advisor to John McDonnell and Jeremy Corbyn, there was a fantastic space that they opened up for me to just collaborate with people in developing and running with ideas. But even they had difficulties in terms of crossing the border into Scotland. And I said, look, if you want me to go and do stuff with any of the radical groups in Scotland, just give us a shout. And they said, no, you're no Scottish. And I said, no, but I'm a Scouser. I could come from bloody anywhere. We're just mongrels from everywhere.
That makes you an honorary Scot. That makes you an honorary Scot, Alan.
But that's what we've got to do. We've got to become. Edward Thompson said about the peace movements in the 70s that we had to be the movements that passed around intellectual contraband in the dead of night, and we passed it around freely on the notion that it's peace and not war that is the answer to the troubles that we face. And we have to be the same intellectual contraband in terms of sustainability.
Thanks, Alan. I mean, I was just going to say, I think in some ways, the political situation in Wales makes it an easier place to start. And then because I think that the relationship between the different parties that aren't the Tories in Wales are less tribal and less divided. And I think also it is true, as your wonderful story said, that the natural resources of Wales are quite often underestimated by
absolutely
people who aren't from that country, whereas Scotland has always been seen as a key issue, both in terms of fossil fuels and in terms of renewables. And of course, the battle with the trade unions is kind of even sharper in that context as well. I mean,
Yeah. The great thing about Wales and Scotland is that there are much greater traditions of radical free thinking.
And community organising. Yeah.
Absolutely. And we just need to blend those in with the radical enthusiasms that you find in Extinction Rebellion. And
Yeah.
that is the movement that's going to get us all out of jail. It's probably the only movement that will get us all out of jail.
After it's got us all into jail.
Yes, for sure.
Be lovely talking to you.
Thanks very much, Sarah. And thanks, Mike. It's lovely to see you once again. This is great.
And you look after yourself, comrade.
Yeah. Cheers, no.